Hey, it worked, I think. I'm not sure. Let's see. Says it's working, but I don't see it on. It says I'm live, actually, there. Yeah, I think it's working. Okay. Just give me 1 second. This is the first time I've used the live video where I've been able to stream on multiple channels that I think it's actually worked for me. Just going to share it a couple places. All right. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Good morning. Welcome to Sunday Morning Live. If you're going to jump on live, I appreciate you if you're able to. Hopefully you're getting notifications that I'm live. I saw that some people were having trouble with that. And if you're watching by replay, I appreciate you very much. Thank you for doing that. All right. So I'm excited about today's topic. I titled it Golden Shadow Work. I want to check one other thing real quick. Sorry, they've changed the format on all this stuff, and it has taken me forever to catch up, shockingly. And my dog is barking. Anyway, it's taken me forever to catch up with technology. Shocker for me, I know. But hey, I'm here and just glad to be here. Glad to be streaming again on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, I appreciate you joining me live or watching the replay. So I titled this topic, the theme for today, the topic for today, Golden Shadow Work. And so I want to talk about the self. I want to talk about shadow work. I want to talk about the golden shadow. What is the golden shadow? And what is golden shadow work, maybe more importantly, and how do we do that? So lots and lots of stuff that I've been seeing over the years on shadow work from people who are deconstructing, people who are staying, a lot of people, especially they're staying in the metaphysical realm with their approach to life after deconstruction. And I've got some really great friends that post, almost daily, definitely weekly. I'm not on Facebook a lot, but I see a lot of posts from a lot of people that I love and appreciate who do an excellent job talking about what we might call traditional shadow work. And I'll talk about what that is in a minute, how I'm defining and using that term in a minute. But, well, essentially, shadow work is discovering, dealing with, and integrating all the parts of our consciousness. But when we're talking about shadow work, we're talking specifically about those parts that are hidden, those parts that are repressed or suppressed in our consciousness or in our personality. And religion, by its very nature, at least Christianity, by its very nature, encourages repression and suppression because it recognizes a war going on within the person between virtue and vice. That might be the older terms for it, but virtue and vice. I want to develop and cultivate these virtues. I want to present myself as a person who has acquired or demonstrates or just naturally has these wonderful virtues like love and compassion and peace and patience and all this stuff, while I'm suppressing my vices. I'm suppressing the parts of myself that may want that may want to act out. I used the plural there because there are many selves in there, right? Which have many different motivations and create a lot of conflict for us. And so there's this conflict between manifesting or revealing or behaving in a way that is virtuous versus manifesting something that might be reflected as a vice in our culture, and or suppressing our emotions or suppressing our traumas, the parts of ourselves that we don't like, the parts of ourselves that we don't want to show to the world. We certainly repress those, and they can become hidden from us. Oftentimes they are hidden from us. There are things that we deny, there are things that we minimize. There's all kinds of different coping mechanisms. And so shadow work is going down into those parts of ourselves that we would normally repress or suppress. Or so, in other words, when they come up, instead of repressing them and suppressing them, we allow ourselves to feel them. We may even allow ourselves to express them in appropriate ways. Or we may go in an exploration of our own consciousness, which is essential to shadow work. In other words, not waiting for them to arise in the moment, but doing some exploration on ourselves, why we feel a certain way, what we feel, basically getting to know ourselves on a much broader and bigger level. And there are a lot of people who are sharing with us on Facebook. Again, like I said, a lot of friends. I'd mention names, but I don't want to, because I don't want to label them as though this is the only content that they produce. And maybe more importantly, I'll probably leave somebody out who's doing really great work out there. But there are a number of people in the group, a number of people that show up on my feed. You know who they are if you're friends with them, who share with us not only great principles of shadow work, not only great explanations of shadow work to help us do our own, but they often include us in their journey. They are very transparent and open about the parts of themselves that they've had to wrestle with or reconcile or acknowledge or work through, particularly as they're working through deconstruction, or they're working through, in some respects, sometimes even their own existential crisis. And they put that out there in a very appropriate, meaningful way that are great examples for us of what shadow work is, and living examples for us of how to do our own shadow work. And I appreciate all of that, and I appreciate every single one of you. One thing that I have not heard anyone talk about is what Carl Jung called the golden shadow. And Carl Jung is the one who gave us the language to describe shadow work. People have been doing shadow work forever, as long as there's been human beings, I suppose, as long as there's been a social self, there's been a shadow self that we've had to deal with. And people have been doing shadow work for years, but for not years, since forever. But Carl Jung gave us the term the shadow self, and talked to us about shadow work, gave us a language and a system for understanding shadow work. So I love the work of Carl Jung. But Carl Jung also talked about the golden shadow. So you have, within the context of the shadow self and within the context of shadow work, you have the dark shadow, which represents the repressed and suppressed parts of ourselves that are unknown to us, that we don't like, or that we've judged, or that society tells us is not acceptable. Maybe, and that society could be large or small. Because God knows, in this day and age, when you say society, there is no consensus. There is no monolith of what society thinks is okay or not okay. But certainly growing up, the people that were important to us, we internalize a lot of our family values. We internalize cultural values. We internalize ethnic values. And we internalize family identity, all kinds of different social selves, family self, ethnic self. All of these things can become part of our identity. So when we're talking about shadow work, and when Carl Jung was talking about shadow work, it's a very large frame that covers all the unknown and hidden aspects of the self. Now, there's been a lot of stuff done and a lot of content made, a lot of books written, a lot of YouTube videos and stuff that you can watch on doing work with the dark shadow. So again, the dark shadow is the parts of myself where I have certain vices that may want to express themselves, or I may have parts that were rejected, especially in childhood, either rejected because of family pressure or rejected because of peer pressure. Certainly my traumas, my traumatic memories and traumatic experiences, abuse, bullying, various different things that I may have experienced, that all becomes part of what we might call the dark shadow. And a lot of people are afraid of their dark shadow. And it's very, very important that we do dark shadow work. And most shadow work will start with dark shadow work. It'll start with exploring these aspects of our own personality, these aspects of our own nature, these things that are down there in the subconscious that we can't quite get rid of. We can't make them go away. Like I was starting to say, in Christianity, we have this battle between virtue and vice, the virtues that we want to be and we want to show to people, and the vices that we are wrestling with or working through in our own personal life. Paul called it, in his writings in Romans and Galatians and in other places, the battle between the spirit and the flesh, the spirit warring against the flesh. And he even gives us a great list in Galatians chapter 5 of virtues, right? The fruit of the spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. I think I got all 9 of them in there. And then he gives us a list of vices as well. He talks about jealousy and fits of rage and sexual immorality and just a whole list of things that are considered works of the flesh, and says we have this war going on inside of us where the spirit wants us to produce the fruit. And if we walk after the spirit, we'll produce the fruit. And the flesh wants us to get into these various different vices. And so we're told to crucify the flesh, or to put the deeds of the flesh to death. And that's how the Bible deals with shadow work. That's how Christianity, it doesn't deny that the shadow exists. The shadow is just called the flesh. And the flesh is the producer of all this evil stuff. And the self, the ideal self, the self that we want to be, produces all this good stuff that everybody wants, right? I suppose everybody wants to feel love, or feel loved, at least. We all want to pursue on some level joy. Peace is really nice to have. If we're patient, we're going to do better in our relationships. We're going to do better at everything if we're patient, right? So these are the attributes we want to manifest. The flesh is the attributes we want to get rid of. From a Jungian perspective or a psychological perspective, and in my view, from a healthier perspective, we don't try to kill those parts. We don't try to crucify those parts. We don't keep continually repressing and suppressing those parts. We bring those parts up, we look at them, we love them, we find ways to integrate those things, and that expands us and grows us as a person and leads to wholeness, which was really the goal in the early depth psychology and early psychoanalytic, psychodynamic types of therapies and stuff, of which Carl Jung was a major contributor. But Carl Jung also talked about what he called the golden shadow. So this is also a part of shadow work, but this is the parts of us, the unknown parts of us, the undiscovered parts of us, parts that we disown, parts that we disconnect from, that have nothing to do with vices. They have nothing to do with trauma. They have nothing to do with the parts of ourselves that there is a social payoff if we repress those, or if we don't show those, or we don't talk about those, or we're not transparent about those. That's all the dark shadow stuff. The golden shadow is the undiscovered parts of us, the disowned parts of us, the repressed parts of us that actually would benefit us, probably to a large degree, in society, or would make us more successful. It's our unknown potential, or it could be our known potential that for whatever reason we have suppressed. And so that's why it's called the golden shadow. The golden shadow is the parts of us that probably, if we were in our right mind, we would want to embrace, but we don't embrace for various different reasons. And because we don't embrace and own those parts of ourselves, we don't recognize those things in ourselves. We don't recognize that they're actually a part of us, or that they exist within us. So that's kind of my introduction. Hey, I got through it in 15 minutes. That's new for me to get through an introduction in 15 minutes. But I want to explain and understand where we're going today when we're talking about the golden shadow and, more importantly, doing work with the golden shadow. So I want to affirm to you that just like you have a dark shadow, just like all of us have parts of ourselves that we don't like, traumas, etc., that we've repressed, we also have wonderful potential, wonderful gifts, wonderful abilities, wonderful attributes that are completely hidden from us, that are completely unknown to us, that then are also part of our shadow. And that's why some people say that when you start to do shadow work, that shadow work is the key to finding your power. Shadow work is absolutely essential to finding the undiscovered self. It's just that we talk a whole lot about shadow work from the dark shadow perspective, so that when people use that term, myself included, oftentimes what we're meaning is strictly work on the dark shadow. Or if we hear people using that term, we think of shadow work as only that which looks at the skeletons in the closet, that which looks at the monsters that are inside my own deep conscious or part of who I am. So let me go a little bit more into detail about how the shadow forms. And I've talked about this a lot. I've talked about it from the Toltec perspective of Don Miguel Ruiz in his books, probably his best-selling book, The Four Agreements, where he talks about the dreams of the world, talks about the dream of the world and the personal dream, and how we live in this, what he calls mitote, this dance, this dream of the world, where we're trying to fit in. We're trying to find out who we are in the context of other people, in the context of our relationships. And so we develop what he calls a book of the law. I love the way he structures this. We develop a book of the law. We develop a sense of what's right and what's wrong. We develop a sense of what's acceptable within our own families and what's not acceptable. We develop a sense of what's acceptable within society and what parts of us are not acceptable. And we create a self that interacts with people and that tries to come out in the daylight, if you will, or in the social light, our social self, what Carl Jung called the persona, and we edit various different parts of ourselves. And if we have those parts manifest, if we have those parts show up, then we judge those parts and condemn those parts, and oftentimes try to punish those parts, which creates a victim inside of us, a victim that receives the judgment, a victim that receives the punishments. And then this robs us from happiness. This robs us from wholeness. This robs us, actually, ironically, from the things that Paul talks about in Galatians chapter 5, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, etc. This is why when people sometimes leave religion and they begin to express these parts of themselves, they discover that they just more naturally begin to feel more peaceful. They just more naturally begin to feel more joy in their life. They just naturally begin to have more acceptance and love for other people. All of that is a byproduct, not of the spirit winning the war over the flesh, but a byproduct of healthy shadow work, where we recognize these repressed parts of ourselves. We begin to change and transform because we recognize these parts of ourselves, and we begin to become more whole. Because not everything that we've deemed to be unacceptable or evil or wrong is unacceptable, evil, or wrong. It just was within the context of our family that we grew up in, or it was within the context of our other social relationships, or it was within the context of our ethnicity, or it was within the context of our gender. Gender is a good example because Carl Jung talks about that all of us have masculine energies and feminine energies within us. He referred to them as the anima and the animus. And he would say that, when you dream, anyone of the opposite sex that shows up in your dreams is an aspect of yourself. It's an aspect of that anima or that animus. And so we can discover freedom by doing shadow work and evaluating those things and saying, okay, I was taught this was wrong. I was told this was wrong. I was told I suppressed all these parts of myself since childhood because that's how I got my needs met. And then I find out, but these things, expressing these things and having freedom in these areas will actually give me peace. It will actually give me love. It will actually give me a sense of wholeness and completeness and freedom. And a lot of that conflict will go away and stuff like that. And then there are other aspects of the dark shadow self that we don't want to deny, we don't want to repress, but we want to be careful how we express those. So anger is one that comes to mind. I am very, very glad, because here's what I don't want us to do. I don't want us to demonize the social self and mistake the social self for the false self, or what Don Miguel Ruiz in his works, he calls the parasite. The parasite is the false self. I want to distinguish between what is the false self and what is an appropriate manifestation of the social self, which is a very healthy self and is not a false self at all. It's a very true, authentic, healthy self, but it may still be repressing or suppressing various aspects of the dark shadow self, and that is okay. So in other words, shadow work, working with our shadow, is not an excuse to just let every aspect of ourself show up in the world and then expect other people to just accept and deal with those other aspects of ourselves. And if they don't like that aspect of ourselves, then they can just go F themselves or whatever. Because I've seen that. I've seen where people have that kind of attitude as well. So the social self is a part of the self. It's a very important part of the self. I'm really, really glad, really thankful that I don't have very many temper tantrums anymore. I certainly don't have temper tantrums like I did as a child, right? I don't. And everybody, I'm picking this one because this is something everybody can relate to. You know, I don't throw a temper tantrum in the sense that I lay down on the floor and cry, or throw things and break things and scream at people because I don't get my way. We all know adults that still do that. I am very grateful that I don't manifest my temper in those ways. Now, that's not to say that I don't still find myself having adult versions of temper tantrums. So an adult version of a temper tantrum could be anything from giving someone the silent treatment to losing our temper. And it could include things like yelling and screaming and throwing stuff. But for a lot of people, it's more subtle than that, right? And so we still do have our ways as adults of throwing temper tantrums. But for the most part, I've seen a couple adults practically throw themselves on the floor and start screaming. You run into some stuff when you're a public figure, when you do, public teaching like I used to as a pastor. And I can think of a few times people had temper tantrums. Adult people had childlike temper tantrums in public, but it's not a general thing. I'm glad I don't do that. I'm glad that I don't express every disappointment, every criticism that floats through my brain of the people that are in my life, people that I work with and whatever, people that are in my family, or that I'm glad I don't express everything that I feel in every moment, because feelings are very much byproducts of a moment. And that moment can be somewhat complex. It can involve the other person and their behavior, but it also can reflect how much sleep I had the night before. It can reflect whether or not I've eaten. It can be reflected in just the mood that I'm in. It could reflect whether I'm feeling good or whether I'm sick. All of these things contribute to how we feel about a person or a situation. All of them, or a lot of them, not all of them, a lot of them can be momentary. And I don't necessarily want to express how I'm thinking and feeling in every moment. The people that are in my life that I'm able to do that with, I'm really grateful for that. Really grateful for some good relationships in that regard. But you get the point. We all have this social self, and the social self is not bad. It's not wrong. It's not just ego. It's not just part of what I would call the false self. So what is the false self? The false self is when I become so invested in the personality and I become so committed to not doing shadow work, to not acknowledging the parts of myself that I don't like because they're too scary. And this really comes into play with religion, because if you manifest some of these negative things, if you even just have them, then this can put you in existential danger. This can put you in danger of the judgment of God. This can bring you under a curse. This could ultimately send you to hell, particularly if part of what's in your shadow are the doubts that you have about the things that you're being taught in church, the doubts that you have about the Bible, the struggles that you have with God because you're angry, either about tragic events that have happened to you or to others. You're told that God is good, that God is all powerful, but there's all this evil in the world, or there are these tragic events, very, very traumatic events that happen to you as an individual, and you wonder, where was God when that happened? So that can create some negative feelings about God, or it can create some real doubts about whether or not God exists. Or I can have conflict about the morality that I have to abide by. Maybe it's a morality, particularly you see this in people that were raised or taught purity culture, especially the more extreme the form, the more repressed the shadow is going to be, and the darker the shadow can become. So people who were taught to kiss dating goodbye, some of you may know what that is. That's a book. And the author, to his credit, Josh Harris, came out and did a whole documentary about how he regrets writing that book, and he sees the danger and the toxicity in what he was teaching in that book. But it was the idea that you shouldn't even date or anything, that you should save everything, even a kiss, for marriage. I knew some people that even as adults had to be chaperoned on their dates to make sure they didn't do anything physically inappropriate with each other. And sexuality is just part of who we are. It's an important part of who we are. You wouldn't be here unless a male and a female had sex. We wouldn't have life. We wouldn't have this physical world. Everything that's living is having sex on some form. And it's a beautiful, wonderful, sacred thing. But when you're taught that it's evil, you're taught that it's terrible, or you're taught that you're terrible for even having those ideas and those thoughts. And this is why I had an interesting conversation with someone in the last month where, the teachings of Jesus on a certain level, particularly those in the Sermon on the Mount, are extremely dangerous to the soul. They're very toxic to the soul. They are not helpful. They are not healthy. They are not loving. They in no way reflect unconditional love or a loving God, because they encourage a level of suppression that leads into the false self. I'm still talking about the false self. But when Jesus says, if you get angry with your brother without a cause, you're in danger of hellfire, that's an existential threat. So he really contrasts behavior and the impulse. He says when he's contrasting the Old Testament and the New Testament, he points out the behavior and the impulse. He says, look, the law says don't murder anybody, but I say if you're angry with your brother, you're in danger of hellfire. The law says you shall not commit adultery, but if you look at a woman to lust after her in your heart, you've already committed adultery with her in your heart. And so he equates then the impulse to do something that your social self might not do with the actual behavior. So to have a well-developed social self, to have good social skills, good people skills, to be able to go in and out of people's lives in a way that brings blessing, in a way that brings benefit and improvement to the lives of the people that you touch, that's a skill or a set of skills that has to be developed. And you should be commended for developing that. You should be commended for doing that work on yourself if you've done that work on yourself, especially if that kind of stuff doesn't come naturally to you. Those are really great things, really great skills, really great aspects of yourself that you don't want to give up. The problem is when we equate the urge or the impulse to do something that our social self would never do, that's coming from someplace. And if we think that we're just as guilty if we have the impulse as if we commit the action, that is just crazy. That just defies all common sense. But there are people then who will start to repress and not allow themselves to feel. That was one of the problems that I had as a Christian. It's the main reason. It is the main reason that I deconstructed. Because when I say it's the main reason that I deconstructed, it's because my deconstruction was part of my own shadow work that I had to do, not trying to imply something else that people may come up with, but I can't help what people come up with. So when we confuse the social self with the totality of the self, then we're stepping into the arena of the false self. This is who I am. So there are genuinely people who do know or very little introspection. I posted a wonderful post by my friend Jeff Turner, one of those people who does a great job talking about shadow work and inviting us into his own journey, being an example for us. But he talked about the Eye of Sauron in the Lord of the Rings trilogy or literature. This eye that's always looking out and never looking within. And so when I am always looking without, when I'm totally committed, I'm trying to think how to say this, when I'm totally committed to the persona, when I'm totally committed to the social self, when I'm totally committed to the personality, then I repress all these shadowy parts of myself. What will happen is they won't go away, but I will project them. This is the idea of projection. I will begin to see them in everybody else. I'll begin to see them in other people, and I'll have an emotional charge on them with other people. So one of the things that I was taught to suppress was laziness. Don't be lazy. I was taught a typical American farming work ethic that came down through my family for generations. Having a good work ethic is a good thing. Not being able to relax when you're not working is not a good thing. Being able to use that, let's just call it a virtue of a work ethic, as a socially appropriate way of escape and thus becoming a workaholic can lead to problems down the road. Can lead to nervous breakdowns. It can lead to all kinds of physical ailments and various different things like that. But it can also lead to this tremendous charge on people who slough off, people who don't carry their own weight, people who don't have a perfectly clean house or a perfectly manicured yard or whatever. They're just lazy. They're just whatever kind of disparaging terms we might come up with for them. And we have a real charge on that. The reason there's a charge on that is because you don't give yourself the freedom to have a lazy day. You don't give yourself the freedom if you're just laying on the couch eating potato chips and watching Netflix, binging on a series or something, and you've got this constant reel of condemnation. Oh, that's just being lazy. That's just shirking your responsibilities, and you're feeling that guilt and you're feeling that shame. Then I can get mad at other people that have the same freedom, that have freedom and liberty in that area that I don't give to myself. We see this a ton with sex and sexuality, especially for women. So there may be women who have had at some time in their life, or maybe you presently, a very strong drive for your sexuality, very strong sex drive. You want to be able to act on that, but you were taught purity code, you were taught the importance of virginity, all these various different things. And then you see these other females out there, you see these other women out there who are freely expressing themselves in this area, and they've had multiple partners. And so you'll have a tendency to come up with a disparaging term, being sensitive of the fact that I'm on YouTube and Facebook and algorithms and all that stuff. So I'm not going to use some of the terms that we might come to mind when you think about someone who is female, who expresses that a lot, or someone who's had multiple partners, or someone who chooses a different lifestyle than what you were brought up to believe in. So there's going to be resentment. I resent that that other person has freedom. I resent that that other person is experiencing pleasure and the joys and the wonders of whether it's laziness or sexuality or whatever the case may be. And so I'm very angry. And so I'll project all that psychic energy, all that emotional charge, all that negativity on someone else. And oftentimes that someone else becomes the other. This is why social justice is so important. This is why, if you're really into shadow work, you also have to get into what Jung called the collective shadow. So racism is part of the collective shadow. In a patriarchal culture, misogyny is part of the collective shadow. And so it's very easy then to take socially marginalized groups, because watch how this works. A group of people who choose to express themselves in a way that is contrary to what society deems as acceptable automatically represents aspects of our own shadow. By definition, it's aspects of the shadow. It's just not aspects of their shadow, but it's aspects of society's shadow, or it's aspects of a collective shadow, or it's aspects of my shadow. This is why you see so much judgment, so much condemnation, and so much hypocrisy in the church. The people who are lunging out at sin, whatever that sin is, and they're constantly going after that, they're constantly preaching that, that's someone that you should stay away from. That you should not listen to, not just because they're going to take that same shame, toxic shame, and inject it into your own soul. They're not only going to take the same poison that's literally killing them on multiple levels of their own being and inject it into you by what they're saying, but that means they have intense shadow conflict going on inside of them. They have intensely disowned parts of themselves. So if they're constantly going after people and their homosexuality, I can promise you they have not reconciled their own sexual orientation or their sexual identity. If they're constantly going after women or Jezebels and stuff like that, they haven't reconciled their issues and traumas with women. Those things are deeply suppressed. And when they are deeply suppressed, they will show up. They don't go away. You cannot put them to death. You cannot kill them. They don't go away. Gosh, I'm just talking about dark shadow work. I haven't even gotten to the golden shadow. So those things will be projected onto other people and attacked in other people. So what they hate and judge about themselves that is really powerful and it's an impulse that keeps rising up. Otherwise, they wouldn't have to suppress it. So if you're in an organization where there's a lot of misogyny, they don't like women in leadership. They teach that the man is the head of the household. They don't teach any kind of egalitarian, did I get that right? Complementarian, I think, ideas. In other words, the equality of the sexes within a relationship or within marriage. They're constantly teaching about order in the home and order in the family and order in society. I promise you that person has not reconciled their own sexual impulses. They've not dealt with their own issues in that area. And that's very often going to come out. And because it's in the shadow, because it's in the dark, it's going to come out in nefarious ways. That's why this stuff happens. That's why this stuff's out there. That's why the people who preach the hardest against it are the ones oftentimes doing it themselves. But we all do this. I'm just picking on preachers probably because I was one, but we all do this. We all have aspects of our shadow that we project onto others, and then we attack in other people. And so the cure for that is to own it within ourselves, reconcile it within ourselves, integrate it into ourselves, and then we become whole and healthy and we stop doing that. Now, what does this have to do at all with golden shadow work? Let's spend the rest of our time talking about that, since that is what I said I was going to talk about. The golden shadow, according to Carl Jung, was the parts of ourselves that are powerful, the parts of ourselves that can help us to excel within society, the parts of ourselves that are undiscovered, our undiscovered potentials. So there are parts of ourselves that we repress or suppress, or we just flat don't even know about. And we can see those in other people as characteristics that we admire. We can see someone and just automatically feel a magnetism towards them, automatically feel an attraction, automatically feel something very powerfully positive towards that other person, because they're attributes and aspects of ourselves that we don't recognize about ourselves. And so, therefore, just like with the dark shadow, we haven't discovered, we don't know about, we have repressed, so we don't own them and integrate them into our lives. This is why dictators can flourish in societies. And this is why one of the components for authoritarianism, fascism, a dictator to come up in a society that is loved, that is admired, or that is voted for, comes from a deep suppression of characteristics that we don't own within ourselves. So if we have a lot of racist characteristics, and the dark shadow side to this, we have a lot of, let's say, racist or misogynistic characteristics within ourselves that we don't own and don't recognize, and we're invested in a false self. In other words, we're denying, we think the social self is the total self. And we see those aspects put on display for us in a leader. We'll gravitate towards that. We'll be attracted to that. We'll vote for that. If we have a deep sense of powerlessness, a deep sense of hopelessness because we can't get ahead financially or economically, or we don't want to do that stuff, but we feel powerless, and a powerful figure rises up as a leader, as a sort of a savior type person, it can be some golden shadow stuff. We can see in that person, whether they have those characteristics or not, we can see in that person's strength. We can see in that person power. We can see in that person success. And because we don't have those things, we gravitate towards that. It's still a part of projection. It's still the result of not doing shadow work. So sometimes what you see in society, or what you see in the leaders in your society, are oftentimes just mirrors of the collective and corporate shadow, and just shows where a group as a society has not done a lot of healthy shadow work. Carl Jung talks a lot about this in a number of his works. One, The Undiscovered Self, I'm thinking of. But let's talk about the golden shadow. Why would we repress or suppress positive aspects of ourselves? Let's say that you're dynamically charismatic, but you have social anxiety that goes along with that. In other words, when you allow yourself to be yourself, you just naturally can make people laugh. You can just naturally make people feel good about themselves or feel good about you. People will just be naturally inclined to like you, but you suppress that self. Almost all eating disorders are the result of a suppressed self. Someone who's very skinny and looks in the mirror, or still thinks they're fat, or is watching what they're eating, they haven't acknowledged their own beauty. Oftentimes, it's often women. It's not exclusively women, but it's often women that have these problems. Almost always, I don't want to say that. In a lot of cases that I've dealt with, I'm going to say that. In a lot of cases that I've dealt with as a therapist and a counselor, when a person has an eating disorder, body dysmorphia, and they're very naturally attractive or beautiful, or because of the way they don't take care of themselves, they fit a model of beauty that society says, this skinny little beanpole model of what we're told, and they can't see that beauty within themselves. They still see themselves as fat, or they still see themselves as disgusting. Well, why wouldn't they just embrace their beauty? Oftentimes there's been a sexual assault somewhere, oftentimes very early in childhood. And so to be attractive to men is to be a prey that stands out among predators. And so subconsciously, if I convince myself that I'm not attractive, then that's a protective mechanism, because if I am attractive, I'm going to stand out to others. And if I stand out to others, I'm a mark. So that's one of the ways that that can work. Another thing is, if you're extremely intelligent, let's say, I'm trying to think of like really powerful things. So beauty, intelligence, charisma. Um, these are things that now you have to take responsibility for. If you're an intelligent person and you own that, you might have to take responsibility for how you use that intelligence. In other words, when this stuff shows up in the golden shadow, when this stuff shows up that, wow, I'm an attractive person, I'm a charismatic person, I'm an intelligent person, I'm a powerful person, there are levels of responsibility that come with that, that challenge our excuses, that allow us to stay comfortable within our lives. If I accept that I am a capable, intelligent person and I am capable of being successful, there goes all my excuses for not being successful. There goes all my excuses for not working hard. There goes all my excuses for why I didn't, let's say that I did really well academically and I could have had a bright future that would have paid me well, that would have brought me honor within a society in a specific arena or area. Say I'm really good at science, or I'm really good at English, or I'm really good at writing, I'm really good at communication, I'm really good at public communication, whatever the case may be. And I didn't maximize that potential. I didn't use that. And I'm failing at life. I'm struggling at life. And that's where my comfort zone is. Then let's say I didn't pursue college education, but scholastically, I did very well. I'm not saying if you do well scholastically, you have to pursue college education. I'm just trying to give you examples. Then there goes all my excuses for why I didn't go to college. There goes all my excuses for why I don't have more friends. There goes all my excuses for why I don't have more money. There goes all my excuses for why I'm not more successful in my life. So I want to suppress or repress or deny or ignore those parts of the golden shadow, those parts that are bright and powerful, because it challenges my comfort level. It challenges my identity as a victim. It challenges my identity as someone who's powerless. It challenges all my excuses for why I don't have the things that I want to have. And that can be really, really devastating when it's like, you mean I'm in this place that I say I don't want to be, and I'm experiencing this pain in my life that I don't want to experience, and I didn't have to or don't have to experience it because I have these attributes and characteristics that can move me out of this place. But if I move out of this place, I'm not going to know who to be. I'm not going to know who to be if I'm not a victim. I'm not going to know who to be if I'm successful. I'm not going to know who to be if I'm powerful. And so that's why I think, Marianne Williamson and her famous quote, whatever you think about Marianne Williamson, she's a political figure now, so I hate to even bring her up, also into the Course in Miracles, which doesn't resonate with me. Not saying it's not a valid path, just something that doesn't resonate with me, not a path that I would choose. But she has a very famous quote that it's our light, not our darkness, that we most fear, that we're actually more afraid of our power than we are afraid of our darkness. And so this is where shadow work, if we don't do shadow work and we're fully invested in the social self, people call that ego. Most of what people call the ego is really just the social self or the persona. And it's healthy and it's good. Like I said, it's good to develop those things. But so then we can think that we're really dealing with our ego by doing dark shadow work. So when I go into my trauma, when I go into my doubts and my questions about the faith that I've been taught, when I go into my the ugly parts of me that maybe are socially or somewhere were deemed socially unacceptable, and I don't like those. But where the true ego can get involved is I can get so invested in the shadow. I can get so invested in the fact that I'm allowing myself to feel my emotions. I can get so invested in the fact that I was wrong. This is why people just stay in deconstruction and deconstruct and deconstruct and deconstruct and deconstruct, because I like that story. I like that version of myself. I like that I don't have to go to church. I like that I don't have to pray. I like that, I'm all these things, that I have all this newfound freedom, but I have this victim story that goes with it. Oh, I was raised, I was told, I was taught, I believed. And then we project. Watch how this works. We project. It's the others in the church. It's the pastors. It's the leadership. It's the system. It's whatever. I've got this emotional charge, and I'm going after that because I'm so invested in my victim story. We actually like our victim stories because they give us excuses. People will use their trauma to avoid responsibility. Come on. We've all done this. Come on. Haven't we all at some level, maybe if we work for someone else, taken a mental health day where we didn't go to work? Haven't we all leveraged at different times of our life? Maybe we just did this in childhood, but haven't we all leveraged being sick? Because if we were sick, we got out of something that we didn't want to do. In some spaces on social media, it seems to me that there's a competition to see who's a bigger victim. I've seen this in racial identities, ethnic identities. I've seen people in marginalized communities competing for the most marginalized story. Black people competing with Jewish people, who's been the most victimized group out there. Or is it the transgender community? They're the most victimized group. We can buy into those stories. We can buy into those selves, and they become identities. And we think that's who we are. We think that's what we are. That's the story that we begin to believe and live out of. And so now shadow work, dark shadow work is not so hard. Now I'm invested in the dark shadow the same way other people are invested in their social self. Now I'm just letting out, this is just what I feel. And I'm coming at attacking other people. And I'm justifying it by saying I'm more enlightened, I'm more awake, I'm actually doing my shadow work, right? But the golden shadow doesn't come with any of those kind of benefits. The golden shadow does not come with those benefits. The golden shadow says you're powerful. The golden shadow says you have attributes and aspects of yourself that are absolutely true about you. They are not made up. They're not fake or phony, but you refuse to own those, because if you own those, there goes your excuses. If you own those, there goes your victim stories. If you own those, that's going to diminish the dark shadow. I can't stay in the shadows. A lot of people, their shadow work, or they're staying in the shadows, or they're talking about the shadows, is really a safety bubble that they put around themselves that prevents them, that they feel relieved, they feel relaxed, they feel okay as long as they're in that space. But now what they're doing is they're unaware of or actively suppressing the golden shadow, because I don't want to have to put myself out there again. Boy, I have done this in spades the last few years. I have definitely been somebody who has suppressed the golden shadow, who has enjoyed the luxuries of not doing certain things that I know would cause me problems, and I have excuses for it. I can use my health. I have had a lot of significant physical health challenges in the last few years. Some people say it's because you walked away from God. So far I'm good. Like, I keep getting better. So I'm happy to not happy, but I'm going through those challenges. I don't see that as evidence of something. I just see that as an evidence of being a human being. We all have health challenges. They just are large or small or whatever they are. But I've used those health challenges to not create more content. I've used those other challenges. I've used being busy. I've used being a father. Oh, I can't create more content. I can't be doing more stuff. I can't be making more money. I can't be experiencing or exploring these other areas of my life because it would require too much adjustment, too much work. So I don't do those things. And, look at this over here. Look at this struggle. Look at this trial. Look at this tribulation that I've been through. And so therefore I'm not doing these other things. See? So we hide from our golden shadow. It's our light, as Marianne Williamson said, that we most fear and not our darkness. Sometimes we love our darkness. Sometimes it's easy to love our shadow. Sometimes it's easy to get into our victim stories. Now, this is so important to spirituality because aside from these human attributes, so I'm talking about human attributes, normal, let's say it this way. Let me just clear the deck. Let me start over. Another very important aspect of this work that's so important to spirituality, so important to evolution of consciousness, so important to the future for ourselves individually and collectively, is that we have abilities that are seemingly supernatural, that every human being possesses. Just like some people are more gifted in certain areas, some people are more intelligent, they're better equipped to do math or reading or language or communication. They have more gift or ability in that area. Or some people have more athletic ability, or some people have more musical ability. There are some people that have more psychic ability. That does not mean that that we don't all have intellectual abilities. That does not mean that we don't all have physical abilities or athletic abilities. That does not mean that we all don't have some level of musical skill. There's some people that don't, I suppose, have musical skill. I don't know. If you're tone deaf, it might be kind of hard. You could probably still learn to play an instrument, though. Anyway, I digress. We all have psychic abilities. We all have what would be deemed supernatural abilities that we either don't know about or that we disown. So that on a very real level, and I don't want to get into any kind of, don't hear this with shame. It's hard to not hear this with shame, but this is true anyway. I believe this to a very large degree, not entirely, but to a large degree. The life that you're living today is the result of the life that you've created. It's the result of your choices. It's the result of your vibrations. It's the result of the way that you're thinking. A lot of the problems that we manifest, we bring upon ourselves. I can honestly say, since I brought up health challenges without going into the details, that some of those health challenges I brought on myself. Some of it was created because of the vibration at which I was vibing. And a lot of it was created because I was suppressing and denying my golden shadow. So if someone were to tell you, you can change reality with your thoughts, or you can influence reality with your thoughts, you can manifest things according to the law of attraction. And if something negative is going on in your life, your vibration may have drawn that to you, or at least strongly influenced the fact that that thing showed up in your life. Now, we all have tragedies that are results of other people. I'm not talking about that. We all have tragedies that are the results of just random events. I'm not talking about that. But generally, we can say, 90% of life is boring and mundane and routine, and 10% of life is adventurous and exciting or horrible and terrifying. So that 10% that's horrible and terrifying, where real tragedy has happened, I'm not saying you attracted that to yourself at all. I'm not saying you're an all-powerful genie and everything that happens in your life is a result. But what I am saying is you've got way more ability to attract things to yourself. You've got way more ability to change your circumstances with thought, with psychic abilities and psychic powers. You have access to precognitions and the future, especially about your future, that you can access. You have access to non-human intelligences and entities that have different perspectives that are here to serve you and here to guide you. You absolutely, I'm totally convinced of that. You have the ability to heal yourself, even when medical science says that you can't heal yourself. You have the ability to manifest synchronicities and seemingly magical events or miracles. But these are abilities that must be worked with, that must be developed if you want to experience the fruits of them. It's not something that just happens just because the ability is there, any more than anything else in life just happens just because you have the ability. I know some great singers that won't even sing at weddings. I mean, one of the people I know has one of the most amazing voices I've ever heard. Give everybody goosebumps in the room, and has used it publicly maybe once or twice in their life. It's done very little to develop that. Now that's just there for them. But as a general rule, if you think about a professional athlete, a professional athlete did not just get there on their natural abilities alone. There was thousands and thousands of hours of training and things that you don't see on game day in the weight room and with trainers and recovering from injuries. Tons of effort and focus and diligence that went into that. So what I'm saying is that to develop these divine human abilities, it also takes effort. These aren't just spiritual gifts that just come from heaven and fall on you regardless of what you were taught in church. They're not just given as the Spirit wills. Even people with psychic abilities, it has to be developed. It has to be cultivated. And that can require the same level of diligence, the same level of focus, the same level of application that it requires from an athlete to reach an elite level. Nobody won an Olympic gold medal just on their natural abilities alone, right? They had to work at it. There was a lot of stuff that had to be seen. All these things exist in the golden shadow. So we make a real mistake if we are exploring our own consciousness, if we're going to the depths of our subconscious and we only find that which is dark. We only find that which is part of the dark shadow. That's part of our perspective. It's part of our perspective that we need to heal. We need to look at why is it that we continue to suppress the golden shadow? Why is it that we don't own and incorporate and integrate these things into our lives? And begin to look at and explore these things, because if we can develop these things, then a lot of the stuff in the dark shadow will become less important. It will become less powerful. It will experience less of an influence upon our lives, and we can stop only understanding work on ourselves as shadow work or doing shadow work, or we can reclaim the energy and the parts of our identity that we've invested too much in our shadow self, that we've invested too much in our victim stances, that we've invested too much in our victim identities. Just to hear that you don't have to be a victim can be freeing and liberating and empowering, can be scary as hell. And in this day and age, and in this culture, that can be offensive. You're victim blaming. No, I'm challenging your victim story. I'm challenging your false identity, not directly, but just indirectly by even putting this video out. Might make you mad. If you're angry, maybe explore that. Why is that there? If it's making you uncomfortable as I'm talking about these things, maybe explore it and find out why it's there. That's shadow work. But again, point of my message, I'm coming to the end here. The point of my message is just to raise awareness of shadow work, that all shadow work is an exploration of who you are. All shadow work is an exploration of consciousness and an exploration of your own consciousness. Social shadow work, which very few people get into, which will lead to some kind of sense of social justice, is very untapped in this space, as far as I can tell. But then there's also golden shadow work. And the golden shadow work is to find the gold in you, it's to find the treasure in you. It's to find natural abilities that you disown about yourself, that you admire in other people, see and admire in other people, but don't own about yourself. And this is where you need a friend. Sometimes you need a friend to walk you through the dark places, to walk you through the shadowy places. Sometimes you need a shepherd to walk you through the valley of the shadow of death. By the same token, sometimes you need a friend that can help you accurately see your strengths. Sometimes you need people that love you that can help you accurately see your beauty, accurately see your treasure, accurately see the gold that is inside of you, that is just very basic, simple, ordinary, common human stuff, beauty, intelligence, charisma, personality, sense of humor, all that stuff. Just to name a few. Beyond that are abilities to transform your life at the level of consciousness through things that you can do with no other effort except for, I don't know what else to call it, raising magical energy to change circumstances, to change things on the physical plane, to draw and attract to yourself serendipitous synchronicities, the ability to heal yourself physically, the ability to manifest a greater level of abundance. All of that is inside of you. An ability to access intuitively knowledge and wisdom that you don't have to learn by pouring through books. All of that is in all of us. But it takes golden shadow work in order to bring those things to the surface, make them available to you so that you can apply them to your life and you can benefit from them. Look at some of the comments here. Let me turn them on. Somebody just comments, I'm assuming here, that's what it's about, control. That's why it's not the word of God. Probably some references that I was making to scripture, maybe to the Sermon on the Mount. Lots of highs from various different places. Somebody watching from Pakistan. That's pretty cool. Oh, that's a good point. Someone on YouTube says, successful people are not always happy. I'm happy. Big difference. Big difference. Totally agree with that. So don't mistake what I'm saying with success. You can do a lot of golden shadow work and still end up socially rejected or not successful, or you may be of a temperament that you're not invested in success. It's not essential to your happiness. Definitely agree with that. Carl Forehand. Hey, Carl, good to see you, man. He says the key is integrating, which I heard you say. Yeah, absolutely. Integrating, which we are not taught. Not only are we not taught in the church how to integrate, we're taught to crucify, not integrate, crucify. We're taught not to integrate. We're taught to not have. We moralize impulses on the same level that we moralize behavior. At least Jesus did that. Much of the New Testament does that. So not only are we taught you can just get rid of that stuff. That's not true. That's not reality. There are no good paths. I can't think of a single spiritual practice in the church that empowers you to do shadow work, that empowers you to integrate. Studying scripture is not going to do that. Memorizing scripture, going to Bible study, going to church, paying your tithe, praying. If you were part of the Word of Faith movement, confessing scripture, doing the in him realities, going through the Neil Anderson bondage breaker stuff. None of that stuff is about integrating discovery and integration. And without discovery and integration, you can't do shadow work. So it's one of the reasons. That's why I said the primary reason that I deconstructed really did not have as much to do with the theological issues or the Bible or my questions about God or my doubts. It had more to do with the fact that I wanted to feel whole and I wanted to feel alive and I wanted to feel emotionally connected to my life. And Christianity provided me no tools, none, zero, zilch, nada, no tools for doing that kind of work. And so it was trying to find tools and resources like I talked about last week for shadow work and even golden shadow work, because I was involved in golden shadow work from the time I was born again, because I realized that Christ was in me, that the spiritual forces were in me. That meant buried in my consciousness, and I had to discover those things. And the reason we did see a lot of the results and a lot of the supernatural stuff that we saw was not because God did them. I'm going to do a follow-up video for this in the group. So if you haven't joined the New Day Global group, here's my chance to plug it. Private Facebook group. You want to be sure to join that, because this week I'm going to be talking about how we discover the Christ in us, how we discover the forces of life, and how that's different than God just answering prayer. And that's very different than, Jesus said, you'll speak to the mountain and the mountain will move. He never said you'll speak to God and God will move the mountain. Very different stuff. All right. It's good to walk away from man-made nonsense. Absolutely. The church is never going to teach you who you truly are. Your pure consciousness. That's all you need to know. I love that comment. Really great comments from that YouTube person. Joe Machuda says, you've come down my street today, as we used to say in evangelicalism. I love that. Somebody says, remember, you're not the first priest to awaken and move on. Many people have left weakened spirituality and have come to truth, have come to truth, still practicing it. Okay. Many Christians with PhDs have left Christianity. Even priests have become spiritually engaged. The spiritual community is wonderful. The church is a franchise after your money. Let's see. Carl says, could it be that integrating dark shadow will open your confidence to embrace the golden? Yeah. So I don't know if you saw the beginning, Carl, but one of the things I said in the beginning, just to highlight it again, almost all shadow work begins with the dark shadow. All I'm trying to illuminate for people today is that that's just one side of the coin. That's just one aspect of shadow work. There's this whole other aspect of golden shadow work that I don't hear. I'll be honest, I haven't heard anybody talk about it. That I just want to highlight and bring into people's awareness. That's the point of today's message. Let's see. JR on YouTube, he says, I want to join. So there should be a link in my bio on my YouTube channel where you can link to the New Day Global group. I assume that's what you're talking about. It's a free group, but it is a private group. Or you can just type in New Day Global in groups on Facebook and join that way. You do have to answer all the questions, agree to the rules and all that stuff, or you're just going to automatically be denied. So make sure you scroll down when you get there and, answer the questions and all that good stuff. And then it's no problem. Carl Feuerhand says, integration, I think, moves you to a different part of the brain. So you respond instead of react when triggered. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. 100% true. It might be difficult for people to think about, how do I move into a different part of my brain? So to simplify that, I would say that we all have various different parts of ourselves. So there's not just one shadow part. There's all kinds of different parts. And this is where proactively doing shadow work, instead of waiting till you're in the moment and reacting, where you get to know these parts of yourself. You get to know these younger, some people call it the inner child. We actually have inner children. There's a therapeutic modality out there called internal family systems, which is probably one of the only versions of depth psychology that's still around, where it talks about you have an internal family system, you have an adult self, and then you have these younger selves who are protectors, but again, it's totally focused on the dark shadow work because they're either protectors or they're wounded parts. And so we have to get around the protectors and heal the wounded parts. I'm not making it simple. Never mind. All I'm saying is, instead of trying to shift brain, sorry, I'm laughing at myself. I'm laughing at myself because I wanted to make it simple and then I get complex. They say a good teacher can take the complex and make it simple. I have an knack for taking the simple and making it complex. But looking at a part of yourself, discovering what is that wounded part, what is that younger part, what is that protective part, but also then, what is this special part? What is this unique part? What is this empowered part? What is and people will stay away from that because we're taught, oh, that gets you into arrogance, that gets you into pride, that gets you into all this other stuff. Nah, not really. Those are excuses for not owning, for fearing your light again more than your darkness. So anyway, thanks guys. Thanks for all the wonderful comments. Thanks for watching. If you're watching this by replay, let me know that you're watching. I appreciate it. I do go back and read the comments. I will be doing some more along these lines with golden shadow work in the group in the future. Let me know what you think about this. Let me know if this is a concept that's new to you, or if this is a concept that you've been aware of and working with. And if you've been aware of it and working with, and you have some ideas or suggestions you want to share, put those in the comments as well. This is Aaron Tomlinson, Sunday Morning Live. Thank you for joining me. Again, if you got all the way through it, thank you for watching to the end. Love and appreciate you. And I will see you next Sunday. And if you're in the New Day Global group, I'll see you later on this week.